Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Cassidy O'Keen, and I'm the Associate Program Officer here at RIZE. And you may know me from all of the incessant emails I've been sending all of you to register for this training. But we're so excited to welcome you and get started with this harm reduction intensive series with Housing First University. So before we get started and I pass it back to Andrew and Ryan, I want to share just a little bit of context about RIZE and how we landed on offering this training to you all. So some of you may know, but RIZE is the only public-private partnership that is dedicated solely to funding solutions to end the opioid overdose crisis. We aim to have everything that we do be guided by those with lived experience and who are unafraid of new ideas. And we use that expertise from them to build networks, create programming, and support organizations who are using novel approaches to prevent overdose and increase access to treatment. We do our best to connect ideas from diverse perspectives from across disciplines to allow new and novel approaches to emerge to, again, end this overdose crisis that we're experiencing. As part of this, we hosted a learning community last spring that focused on housing and harm reduction. And Andrew, one of your trainers from Housing First University, was actually a panelist during that learning community. After that training, we received so much positive feedback and many requests for more training to support local low barrier housing providers. So in response, we partnered with Housing First to provide this harm reduction intensive training series. And we hosted the intro session in September. If you were not able to join that intro session, do not fret. It was recorded and it is posted on our website. And I'll go ahead and drop the link to that in the chat in just a minute here. But following the intro session, we got some feedback that folks had limited capacity for some capacity building efforts. And so we postponed the rest of this cohort-based series into the new year. So at long last, we're very excited to get started and share this training with you. This session and all of the other ones from the cohort series will be made available again on our website, and we'll aim to have them all posted weekly following each of the sessions. So take a look out for those. I'll go ahead and again drop that link here in the chat. But if you have any questions about RIZE or our work or any feedback about this training or anything else that we're doing, please feel free to shoot me an email. Contact me at any time. I'll go ahead and put my email again down here in the chat. And I want to just take a second to thank you all so much for all the amazing and hard work that you do every day. It's not easy, and we appreciate you. I'm going to hop off actually here in just a couple minutes and let your amazing trainers take over and let you get started. But again, thank you so much and welcome.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cassidy. Yeah, we're super excited to be here partnering with RIZE for this training series. So I'm going to just start out by telling you a little bit about who we are and what we do and what we're doing here today. So my name is Andrew Spiers. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance at Pathways to Housing PA. So Pathways is a homeless services organization based in Philadelphia, and we use the Housing First model to help end chronic homelessness for single adults who are living with serious persistent mental illness and or a substance use disorder. We've been doing that since 2008 to much success. About 85% of our folks stay housed after a 5-year period. And harm reduction is incredibly integral to the work that we do here. So a lot of folks have reached out to us over the years and asked for, what's in the secret sauce? How are you doing what you're doing? And so we launched Housing First University in 2019 to help get some of this information on best practices into the hands of others. We don't want to keep it a secret. We want everybody to see these same successes. And so I spend my days training other folks like yourselves on Housing First, harm reduction, integrated care, service delivery best practices. And we developed this harm reduction intensive training series after offering some 101 level, some 201 level stuff, and finding that folks really were just interested in digging in more, talking about all this stuff more at length. And so we developed this series. All of our harm reduction examples speak to the work we do in permanent supportive housing. But we want to engage with folks, see what challenges are coming up in your programs, what you're struggling with, what you want to chew on with us here. And so that's what we're going to be doing over the next 6 weeks. Today, we're going to be together for about 2 hours. We'll take a short break halfway through so you can stretch your legs and use the bathroom. And then in subsequent weeks, we'll do 1 hour sessions. We really encourage you to engage with us and bring all your questions, bring your head scratching cases. But that's just a little bit of an intro to who I am, what we're doing. I'm going to toss it to my 2 training specialists, Ryan and Khalil, to say hello as well, and then we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan. I use he and they pronouns. I'm so excited to be with you during this training series. My background is predominantly in mental health, inpatient and outpatient settings, but I've done some harm reduction work also. And I've been with HFU for about 1.5 years. And so it's always exciting to hear kind of fresh examples from the field about what people are doing, what they're struggling with, and to problem solve with you. So I hope we can do some of that as we go. I'll kick it to Khalil.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Khalil. I use he, him pronouns. I've been at Pathways for about 1.5 years now, but I'm fairly new to Housing First University. Before that, I was leading a polysubstance use team at Pathways where we were doing harm reduction every day. So I am excited for this training to hear what comes up.
So I'll take us through the housekeeping slides next. This virtual sort of format that we're in is so useful, being able to kind of connect people at distance. But I've learned throughout the course of the kind of quarantine period and as the continued pandemic period has gone on, that it's so easy to just multitask and not get much out of a training session, a series, a dialogue. And so we would just invite you to be present with us if you can. If you can shut the Outlook window down on the other screen or turn the phone over, I think we'll have a richer dialogue and we'll all get more out of it. So that's our invitation. We are able to offer CE credit for social workers. And so if you are licensed and would like CEs, a couple of requirements there from our accrediting body. We ask that you stay for the duration of the training, that you participate in any discussions that we offer, and we will offer some polling, like the Zoom polling feature. And so make sure you're responding to those poll questions. And if you need credit, you have to keep your camera on for the duration of the session. And we love to see your face anyway, so it's a win-win. We can see kind of how the content is landing for you and whether you're like, no, this is not fitting. It's nice to be able to check in on faces and body language that way. We welcome questions and comments throughout the training. We do have a Q&A built into the end of each training session, but I think if you're holding your questions until then, it doesn't feel right to us, right? Like we want you to kind of raise questions, raise comments, push back as we go so that we can engage with you. I think other people have those same questions as we go. And so you being brave enough to voice them allows us all to kind of learn and grow together. So consider trying that. We do require a course evaluation if you need CE credit, or if you need a certificate simply of attendance that's not a CE credit. And so we'll drop a link to another Google form in the chat right at the end of the session. And then even if you don't need a certificate, we love your feedback. We read every single piece of feedback and we'll often adapt a training series as we go based on the feedback that comes through those evaluation forms. So we really encourage that for everybody. We're going to hit you with a ton of evals throughout this series. And you may have seen, if you scroll up in the chat, I dropped a link to a pre-survey as well, kind of just getting a sense of your attitudes and your perspective on harm reduction. And so if you haven't yet filled out that pre-survey, do it now. It's only like 4 quick questions or 4 or 5 questions. And so it won't take you very long. You can pull that. It's okay. You can multitask for this one thing. And so we'll drop the remainder of our course evals at the end of each session as we go.
I think I want to jump in and say about questions and comments. I think Ryan just said, please feel free to jump in with those. We're a relatively small group, so you can unmic just to say, hey, can you clarify that, or can we chew on that a bit longer? You can also use the chat for those questions or comments if you'd like as well. You can either send those publicly so everyone can see, or you can send them privately to myself or Ryan or Khalil, and we'll keep an eye on those and make sure your question gets answered without revealing who you are if you're shy or nervous about asking your question in front of other people.
Yeah. We also have the closed captioning enabled. And so if that's helpful for you, you can use from your own Zoom platform, you can click the CC button and get those turned on for yourself. If you have other accommodation requests, please send us a private message and we'll do what we can to help you meet that need. A little bit of an intro, a little bit more of an intro about what we're doing for the next 6 sessions. So as we mentioned, this is a 6-session deep dive into both the philosophy and the practice of harm reduction. And we do spend quite a bit of time kind of talking around, nibbling around the edges of harm reduction, right? What's it all about and why? And I think you'll understand the importance of that as we go through. But we'll also get a chance to kind of talk more concretely, especially as the series goes on, about the practice of harm reduction in a housing context. And so I think it's always helpful to have those kind of very concrete and specific examples. And if you have specific examples that are coming to mind as we go through, we really strongly encourage you to bring those to the table so that we can chew on them a bit. Pathways has been doing this work, as we mentioned, since 2008. And so we've seen a lot in that time. And I think we've got a lot of collective knowledge and skill that's developed over that time. And so there's not going to be much that you're seeing that we haven't seen or that some expert in-house hasn't, and we'll be able to bring that knowledge to the table. So each session after today's 2-hour session will be 1 hour, and we'll also include kind of a short rewiew from the previous session. If it so happens that you miss a session, I think you'll get some of the gist of that session during the next one in the beginning of that session. We're hoping, again, that this will be some hands-on time and that all of our collective daily practice will inform these discussions. If you don't chime in, Andrew and I will talk you to death. We will talk the whole time. We are not short on words, so chime in, get your stuff in there. In terms of our agenda for today's session, doing some welcomes, some intros, I'd like to kind of do a little bit of group norm stuff. Some of this stuff can be tough to talk about as we wrestle with the difference between like an abstinence-based recovery type model versus a harm reduction model. And so I want us to make sure that we're being respectful to one another's perspectives. We'll do some check-in stuff as well. We'll spend time kind of unpacking that complicated relationship between stigma, shame, trauma, stress, and risk, all these kind of interrelated concepts that really impact the people that we serve in a housing context. And we want to sort of kind of connect the dots between all those things as we present harm reduction as a bit of the right solution for some of those problems, right? We'll talk about harm reduction in our daily lives. It shows up even when we're not thinking about it. And so let's call it what it is and apply that same concept to our work with participants. And we'll talk about some of the goals and limitations of harm reduction, as well as some of the outcomes that we can hope to achieve using a harm reduction approach. And then hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A, some more focused Q&A as you're kind of distilling and processing what we talked about today.
Ryan, after the learning objectives, I realized we didn't really put in a slide to allow for folks to kind of check in with us and introduce themselves. So after we go through this, let's take a moment and just like see who's here with us today.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So these learning objectives that you see on the screen are those that we'll be covering throughout the series, right? All of these bullet points we're gonna hit on throughout the series, but the 2 bolded and italicized ones at the top are the ones that we hope to cover by the end of today's session. So by the end of today's session, we hope you'll be able to define stigma and explain its impact on people who use drugs or engage in other risky behavior, not just drug use. And then we hope you'll be able to recognize safety and bodily autonomy as the primary goals of harm reduction. And hopefully we'll see some of the ways that shows up in a housing context there.
Awesome. So I'm just wondering if folks, I'm not sure that everyone here knows each other. So if you either want to just drop in the chat who you are, what you do, where you work, and maybe what attracted you to this training series, what are you hoping to get out of it? What are you hoping to learn or discuss? You can either drop that in the chat, or if folks are feeling brave and want to unmute and say hi, I'd certainly love that. Also want to encourage folks who don't have their cameras on, if you feel comfortable turning on your cameras, we would love to see your faces. Helps us build community and connection, and we're going to spend a lot of time together over the next 6 weeks. So would love to see you if that's a possibility. Don't worry about snacking or eating on camera. It doesn't bother me, that's for sure. But yeah, who's here?
Hi, everyone. I'm Marie Matthew. I'm the library social worker with Cambridge Public Library. I was interested in this training. I think I met Andrew at the NASW.
NASW.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were the first ever library social worker I met, and I thought that was so cool. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah. So that's what brought me here. Nice to see everyone.
I'm Wendy Blewis. I work for High Point, and I oversee a family program that operates at a Housing First model, permanent supportive housing, and a chronically homeless men's program, permanent supportive housing, that also operates on a Housing First model. And just here to learn more, and better, gain a better understanding of some things, and maybe get some tips around how other people handle specific behaviors, clients.
Awesome. Welcome, Wendy. Thank you. Who else?
I'm Molly Dugan. I'm the Associate Director of Behavioral Health at St. Francis House, which is a day shelter in downtown Boston. And similarly, I'm pretty familiar with harm reduction, but looking to learn more.
Awesome. Welcome, Molly. I see some folks saying hi in the chat. Nikisha, shelter manager, Catholic Social Services. Jamie from Pine Street Inn and an intern at Boston Medical Center. Interested to learn more about harm reduction and housing first to see how the programs I work for can better apply these models to our work. Awesome. Thanks for being here. Anybody else want to say hi?
Hi, my name is Layla. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am at the Boston Public Health Commission. I was hired for a grant-funded position. People familiar with the Mass and Cass area, we opened a low threshold site here. So we had 25 beds and we just expanded to 75 this last month. And yeah, I'm here to learn more. I was one of RIZE's harm reduction scholars last year and just really fell in love with this work. And I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. Thank you.
I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
Go ahead, David.
I'm David Martins. I'm the Director of Individual Shelters for Catholic Social Services in the Diocese of Fall River. So I oversee our 6 year-round shelters and our 2 emergency overflow. We are all low barrier shelters, so harm reduction is a big part of what we do. So thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. And is it Toph? Am I pronouncing that right?
Hi, it's Toph, actually. No worries. That's okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Toph, and pronouns are she, her, and they, them. I work at Pine Street Inn as a housing placement and stabilization specialist. So it's a case management type of role. And I went through the introduction kind of training on this, and I really enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. And it just made me, want to dive further into connecting with people about housing first and harm reduction. And I think both in my program that I work for and in all the other housing programs I interact with, I think there's a desire to move more towards lower barrier and housing first models, but I think I see some hesitance and lack of education on like how to get there and what that really means. So I'm hoping to equip myself with some more of those skills. So I have a clear idea of what that means and can share that with others.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I see a lot of other folks in the chat. Mike, I hope you're on the mend from having the flu. Doris and Carl and David and Lourdes and Rebecca, thank you all for being here and sharing. Maybe one more. Does one more person want to say hi and then we'll keep it moving? or we'll just keep it moving.
Awesome. So let's cover some quick group norms. I would say that these are kind of guideposts for our discussions today. And I hope that they do, and for the series. And I hope that these sessions are discussion oriented, although I know we have a ton of information to drop on you too, like kind of lecture style. So, but some guideposts for us. First, I think it would be helpful if folks practice empathy, right? Discussions around stigma and risk that we're going to talk about can sometimes touch on sensitive topics, and that requires us to sort of be understanding of a diverse set of backgrounds and experiences that even our group here might have. And so practicing some empathy in those conversations, I think will allow a more open, honest, and kind of learning oriented environment. I think it would also be helpful if we can assume good intentions, right? Both for our colleagues here in the room as we're having these discussions, and toward the people receiving services in our programs. I think if we're not starting from that place, I don't know what we're really doing. And so assuming good intentions can be helpful here. As we're kind of participating in this series, please remember to stay committed to openness and learning. Perhaps there are practices that you'll hear about in here that like are far outside of your typical practice, or maybe doesn't seem like it would fit your environment or your setting. And so I think just kind of approaching that with an openness and understanding that it is working somewhere, it's helpful for participants somewhere. And if there are elements that you can skim off the top that can be helpful for your participants, I think we're all better off for that. I think we may have differing opinions. And hopefully we can discuss those differences in ways that are both respectful and can facilitate our own education and growth. I would encourage us to make use of what we call the stretch rule. And so this is the idea that like, if you're a person who tends to talk a lot in group settings, consider talking a little less. But if you're a person who doesn't talk at all in group settings, maybe consider stretching and talking a little bit more. We want to hear those voices too. And hopefully, we can all get our needs met that way. And then lastly, wanted to offer the ELMO rule. It stands for enough, let's move on. And so this is the idea that maybe somebody's got a point to make pretty strongly, and we can all sort of acknowledge like, okay, that point has been made. We recognize the issue that you're presenting, but it may be time for us to keep moving so that we don't get bogged down in this one issue for our whole 2-hour session, right? So anybody can just type Elmo in the chat. And I think that might be a clue for all of us. Like, okay, we've done it, right? If you're like, come on, guys, keep moving, just type Elmo in the chat. That's helpful for us. If folks have other ideas for group norms, I think feel free to kind of consider maybe dropping that in the chat, writing that to us privately. Yeah. In the interest of time, I'll keep us moving now. Elmo. All right, so I want to hit us with our very first poll. And this is just a temperature check on harm reduction. Sorry for doing so much kind of attitude surveying for you, but we're really curious about where people are at with harm reduction, with this practice. And so I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. And so using that feature, tell us how you really feel about harm reduction. Are you a strong supporter? Consider yourself a harm reductionist? Maybe there are some things you agree with, but you're not 100% sold. Maybe you're still trying to figure out how you feel about harm reduction. And then the final group, perhaps there are folks here that really are not supporters of harm reduction. And if you're a person who's coming in not as a supporter of harm reduction, but you're willing to sit through this series, I really applaud you. So thanks for being here. We'll give folks
And you know, it says on the slide, this is anonymous. We're not going to share the results with your boss or say who voted what to RIZE. The same with the attitude survey. It does request your name and email. It's only for our reference to see who has and hasn't completed it, but we're not going to share, you know, the information about who responded how with anyone else, just so you're aware.
Okay, I think that's all of us. We'll give it 5 seconds here. All right, let me share the results. So 60% of people in this space today consider themselves strong supporters of harm reduction. They are harm reductionists. That's incredible. I love that. I hope that this continues to be useful, right? Like I hope the deep dive here enables you to just continue to expand your practice and get something, even if it's a specific concrete skill or a new way of framing issues around housing and harm reduction. We got 20% of people that are saying there are some things that I do agree with, but maybe not 100% sold. And again, I hope we can offer sort of a philosophical underpinning that helps sell you further on these ideas. And then 20% of people are still trying to figure out how they feel about harm reduction. We hope we want to tip you in that direction, hopefully throughout this training series. So thank you for sharing that. All right, I got another poll for you on this next slide. We talk about harm reduction not just from the perspective of substance use, and I know RIZE and Cassidy talked about like opioid use disorder, for example, in her intro. But we think about harm reduction pretty broadly in a housing context, right? We want to keep people stably housed. And so there are a bunch of things, even beyond substance use, that we use harm reduction principles to help mitigate, to help intervene for. And so we want to ask your perspective on some various risk behaviors. So tell us your thoughts on the following risk behaviors. And the idea is either it's okay for everyone, it's okay for others, but not me. It's okay for me, but not for some people, and it's not okay for anyone. So let me launch that poll for you.
So interesting watching these results roll in. Very excited to share this and talk about it a little bit when we have everybody's answers. Like we're still waiting on a handful of people. Give it another minute, maybe. About 20 seconds left for my two stragglers. All right.
Okay, I just stopped it. I'm gonna go ahead and share the results. This is super interesting. Okay, so regarding drinking alcohol, a majority of people feel like it's okay for everyone. About 20% of people are saying it's okay for other people, but not for me, right? And so perhaps some self-awareness there around their own triggers or a recovery journey, etc. Could be a lot of reasons for that. About 14% of people are saying it's okay for me, but not for some people. Again, perhaps a recognition of like, okay, people have their own recovery journeys. That's not what my life is looking like, but understanding that that might not be okay for some people. And then one answer, or 7%, saying not okay for anyone drinking alcohol. Got it. Okay. Using marijuana, same percentages here. Well, 57% say it's okay for everybody. And I'm so curious to know whether that is like place defined, culturally defined. I have like so many questions around that, right? Like where we see marijuana being legalized in many places, either recreationally or medicinally. Other places, that's not true. Very interesting there. 29% of people are saying it's okay for others, but not for me. So more than with alcohol. One person saying it's okay for me, but not for some people. And then one person saying it's not okay for anyone. Cool. Using crack cocaine. I think this is where, where alcohol and marijuana have a place in our public discourse that is more open. I don't think the same is true for crack. So this is very interesting. 29% of people, so many fewer than like weed or alcohol. 29% of people saying it's okay for everyone. Like just let the crack fly, let them all have it. Where 29% of people saying okay for others, but not for me. Okay. 0% of people here saying okay for me, but not for some people. I think that's interesting. And then a much higher percentage than before, 43% of people saying not okay for anyone. So a real difference there between weed, alcohol, and crack cocaine, where it's like this touches on maybe some fear, maybe some extra concern, maybe some understanding of potential negative consequences of using crack. So it's some different numbers showing up there. This one is fascinating to me, especially here in the US, American culture. Having sex for money, drugs, a place to stay, or to meet other needs. 36% of people saying it's okay for everyone. 21% of people saying okay for others, but not for me. And those numbers are similar to the crack numbers. 0 people saying it's okay for me, but not for some people. And then 43%, so the same number as crack, saying it's not okay for anyone. So very similar sort of ideas around risk there, I think, between crack and having sex to meet needs. Prescribed mental health medications, choosing not to, right? Like deciding, I may have like a diagnosis, for instance, and I'm deciding that I'm not going to take prescribed mental health medications. Like that's not going to be a thing that I want to pursue. 43% of people saying it's okay for everyone. 14% saying it's okay for others, but not for me. 7%, one person saying it's okay for me to not take those meds, but not for some people, right? So there's a difference between me and others. I can make that choice, but others, some people are not, maybe shouldn't be making that choice. And then 36% of people saying it's not okay for anyone. So those people I think are saying, if you've been prescribed to mental health meds, you've got a mental health challenge that you're dealing with, it's not okay to choose not to take those meds. And then finally, the last one, stealing something for money to meet needs, right? And I was thinking again around those needs about like drugs, having a place to stay, or to meet other needs. So 36% of people saying it's okay for everybody. And we've got like a core group of people apparently in this training that are like, anything goes, no rules, have your sex, steal your stuff, smoke your crack. It's okay for everybody. 21% of people saying it's okay for others, but it's not okay for me. Like that is crossing some sort of like personal, moral, ethical boundary. But I'm not judging other people, is I think what I hear you saying there. 0% saying it's okay for me, but not for some people. And then 43% of people saying it's not okay for anyone. And I'll just call attention to the fact that the not okay for anyone group has been very similar since the crack question, right? So crack, sex, not taking mental health meds, and stealing to meet needs have been pretty similar in terms of a group. Let me just stop talking. I know I just like read a bunch of numbers. Anybody have kind of just a response to that? What are you noticing among your colleagues and peers? What's coming up for you as you thought about risk behaviors? I'd love to hear people's kind of perspectives there.
I think it kind of depends on how you're interpreting the word okay, or how you're interpreting the question. Like, is this okay? What do you mean by okay? It's okay if you want to use crack cocaine, you know what? I'm not going to judge you. It's okay. You know, if you need to go out and prostitute for whatever, food for your kids, alcohol, drugs, then I'm not going to judge you. So it's okay for you. So I think it can be viewed that way. Or you can say, well, it's not okay for anybody, any of this stuff, because it's not healthy. It can damage your body. It can damage your brain. It puts you at high risk for many negative things. So no, it's not okay. So I think it's kind of maybe how someone might have interpreted the question.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are potential consequences, to your own sort of like health and well-being, versus different consequences around, is like my provider going to judge me? Is the person who like has provided my housing or like shelter or social services needs, are they going to judge me? That's a different type of okay. Thanks for calling attention to that. Yeah. Other thoughts? Anyone else having other thoughts there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, I was going to say, I think a lot of it has to do with stigma, because alcohol and marijuana seem to be generally acceptable, and the rest, people seem to have like another outlook on it.
Absolutely. Some things are more socially acceptable. Like, we're all drinking. It must be okay for everybody, but we're not all walking around saying, hey, how was your crack this morning? Like before you came in. This is like that's not part of our typical conversation, right?
I like this comment from Mike in the chat, who says, do I think anyone should have to use sex for money, drugs, or a place to stay? No. Do I think it's okay if they are choosing to do so? For sure. Yeah. And I think that speaks to and also what Wendy said, right? What do you mean by okay? A lot of these conversations involve a lot of nuance, right? Harm reduction is not black or white stuff. We got to get real comfortable in those gray areas, right? Both harm reduction and housing first work is really about, let's look at this individual, what their circumstances are. It's not a standardized kind of process, right? Our work is very individualized. It's going to require a lot of creativity, a lot of patience, and really meeting folks based on their strengths, their barriers, etc.
If maybe one other person has thoughts that they wanted to share, that's fine with us here, or we'll keep moving if not. I've seen another comment in the chat. What's interesting is that particularly with alcohol, the results are not totally in line with the risk of the behavior to themselves or others. I wonder if you can say more about what you mean there.
Sorry,
I'll say that people don't
I think
realize. Go ahead. Sorry.
Just my comment with it. Those results feel like they have to do with kind of like the risk of the behavior, but also just like the social perception of the behavior. Because like alcohol use is, most people do it, and it's also like one of the like more risky things that like a person can be doing. So that was just my observation from the results.
Yeah, what an interesting point that like just social acceptability itself doesn't imply reduced risk there, right? Where we know that alcohol has a great deal of risk for many people. So yeah, interesting point. Thank you for bringing that up. All right.
I want to say one quick thing before we move on, Ryan.
Yeah.
So I just want to acknowledge, like, we all answer these questions differently based on our own values, our own beliefs that are informed by our background, our upbringing, our exposure to, et cetera, right? And so we inherently are going to assign value to risk. There are going to be risks that I take that you think that's not a good risk. Andrew shouldn't do that. There are going to be risks that you take that maybe don't align with my values or beliefs, right? A thing I want us to really try to strive for throughout this series is value neutrality when it comes to risk behaviors, right? Because those things are not inherent or intrinsic to the behavior. That value is assigned by us as human beings, and we're all going to have different values and beliefs there. So as much as we can try to separate this is a good risk, this is a bad risk, from this is just a risk that some people are going to take. It might not be a risk that I take, right? But try to separate our value assessment from the actual behavior as much as possible as we move throughout the training. And we'll have plenty of time to kind of dig more into what that means as we move forward. But just want to offer that as an idea from the start.
Great. So I'm going to hit you with kind of a big umbrella statement on the next slide here. And we'll talk more as we go about these concepts here. But from our perspective, there are two main goals of harm reduction and using harm reduction interventions in this work. And that's safety and bodily autonomy. These are the things that drive the work, the reasons behind the work, and where all the other stuff grows out of, right? And so I think for us as caring providers who want to see people do well, safety, I think, tends to come more easily, right? Something seems scary or unsafe. It's like, oh my goodness, I want to help keep you safe. I want to protect you from harm. And so that one, I think, makes some sense. That's our compassion kicking in. And this other one here is bodily autonomy. And I love this quote from the UN. The denial of bodily autonomy is a violation of fundamental human rights. And so the idea that autonomy is quite high on the priority list of what it means to live a successful, meaningful life that is worth living. And I think this is the place where services, I think, in general, just painting with a broad brush, fall short, right? We have a lot of programs with a lot of rules that strip people of their autonomy because we think if we can sort of get people into the right box, we'll make them successful, right? If you display these behaviors that sort of fit in line with our sort of moral and ethical standards, you'll be able to do well, right? Like you'll be able to be independent. So we strip people of their autonomy, and that's often counterproductive to developing good relationship, to actually helping people improve their safety. They're going to avoid us. They're going to not want anything to do with us when we are essentially treating them like children, stripping autonomy from them. And so this middle point, harm reduction as the middle point, or the kind of the meeting of compassion and pragmatism, where safety and bodily autonomy come together. Those are the goals for what we're going to talk about throughout the remainder of the session. I also want to talk about, it's very clear that people have different senses of risk, right? From this last poll that we did, different senses about what is risky versus what is not. Our own values come into play, as Andrew mentioned. And so there may be times when we have to have conversations with our participants that are uncomfortable to talk about, right? Let's say sex work, right? Is it in my comfort zone to talk with you about sex work? Maybe not, but is me avoiding discomfort more important than having conversations about ways to reduce harm? I would say the answer is no to that, right? And because if our goal is supporting folks in surviving, when we avoid those kind of icky, uncomfortable conversations, that's actually more risky than not talking about it, right? We're not contributing to safety and bodily autonomy by avoiding those conversations. And it's likelier to sort of increase the risk of whatever behavior is happening, right? And so our discomfort is worth experiencing if it means saving somebody from dying, allowing somebody to see another day and continue to grow as an individual, as a human being. I want to talk a little bit quickly about some things that are personal to me, and I apologize for talking personally, but I think you'll see why in a second. These are some truths and values that I hold for myself, and I wonder if you do for yourself as well. Number one, I consider myself an expert on myself, right? Nobody else is an expert on me. My mom isn't even an expert on me. Andrew is not the expert on me. I'm the one who's lived in this body for the number of years that I have, and as such, I'm the one with the experiences, with the motivations, with the value set. It's me. I'm the expert on me. Nobody else is. And as the expert on me, I believe I get to determine my life's outcome, right? How could you, without knowing all my motivations and experiences, sort of direct my life where I should go? You're not the expert on me. How could you do that, right? So I get to determine my life's outcome. And as I'm kind of walking my day to day, I sometimes am going to choose to engage in what is perceived as risky behavior, or even I might think it's risky and I still want to pursue that behavior, right? But because I'm the expert on me, I get to do that. I get to choose to be risky sometimes. And even when I'm at my riskiest or doing things that are like not socially acceptable broadly, or my family doesn't accept it, or my boss doesn't accept it, I still think I deserve love and respect. Right? As a human being who's just trying to be happy in the world, who will sometimes make risky decisions, I believe I deserve love and respect. And with that, if I can achieve that, if I can have that, I really have a glass kind of half full view of life, right? How nice is it that I get to sort of like navigate my life and chart the course, sometimes making risky decisions and still receive love and respect. That sounds incredibly positive to me. I feel really good about making those statements. And so turning to our participants, the people we serve, the people in our care, I think the same is true for those folks, right? People are experts of themselves. They get to determine their lives' outcomes. They sometimes will get to choose, they get to choose, and sometimes will choose to engage in high-risk behavior, even if it's something that I consider risky, that I would be really scared of in my own life. It's their life. And they still deserve my love and respect. And I think some of the success stories that we hear in this Housing First program, in terms of people that have moved through the program successfully and no longer need this incredibly high level of support and care, that just blows my mind, that level of success, right? And so the possibilities are truly endless when we can sort of provide that love and respect and walk alongside people even as they choose risky behavior, right? All right, I'm going to kick it over to Andrew to talk a little bit more about assumptions.
You know what, Ryan? I actually think we should take our break slightly early, since we're almost at 11:30 already, and this section will take a while. I don't want to hold folks too long. So if we can take a quick 5, I've got 11:23. We can come back in 5 minutes at 11:28. We'll jump back in. All right, so welcome back. I'm going to ask you all to talk a little bit. You can either use the chat for this or unmute and jump in. But I want to start with, take off your trauma-informed hat for a minute. Take off your social worker hat. And I want you to throw out some ideas, some stereotypes we have about people who use substances, people who use drugs. What does the media tell us about people who use drugs? What does Hollywood tell us about people who use drugs? What do politicians tell us about people who use drugs? Give me some of those stereotypes.
They're bad people.
What else?
They're dangerous and they sell drugs to your kids for Halloween with Halloween candy.
Yes, the old drugs and the Halloween. Who's wasting their drugs on some kids that are appreciating?
Exactly.
What else? I see Molly in the chat says it's a choice. Oh, they just don't want to work. Yep. What else?
They don't care about their kids or their family.
That they're crazy. They deserve any consequence of drug use, no matter how severe or loosely related to the use itself. they're selfish. Yep. What else?
It's their own fault.
Mhm.
Mm.
They don't want to change.
Yeah, we really attribute substance use, and I think similarly with folks experiencing homelessness, right, to personal moral failings, right? Like somebody has like made bad decisions, and that's resulted in the current state that they're in. Like they brought it on themselves; it's their own fault, right? Let's see. They're not aware of our stigma and prejudice. Interesting. I would not want to say they don't care, but the influence is overpowering. All right, interesting. Yeah, so we have a whole lot of assumptions about folks who are using drugs, right? But realistically, sorry, it's really hard to co-navigate the slides with somebody else. Realistically, drug users are all kinds of people, right? Now they're moving on their own. Doctors, mothers, your neighbors, students, your friends, fathers, your loved ones, community members, right? Probably everybody in this training right now has used a drug at some point in their life, right? Have you ever left work after a long day and had a glass of wine or had a beer, right? You used a drug. That's a substance. That's a drug just like anything else, right? But we don't talk about these types of people who use drugs, right? These like productive members of society, because doing that would mean we would need to admit some uncomfortable things, right? About ourselves, about our loved ones, about our family members. And so often we don't talk about this. I saw somebody in the chat mentioning stigma, right? So here's our dictionary definition of stigma: a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person, right? Ugh, heavy. Again, I'm going to ask y'all to either jump in the chat or shout out. Name some groups of people that experience stigma or some behaviors that are stigmatized.
Overweight people.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that into discussion. Most people do not, I don't hear that one very often in trainings. What else? LGBTQ community, says David in the chat. Absolutely. Who else? Who else and what else?
Yeah, people with lack of education. Somebody else mentioned it.
Who else? What else? What types
People
of behaviors are stigmatized? Behaviors or groups of people?
People with mental health issues.
Yep.
People who have gone to prison, that is written right there. There's a lot of them. People who are single mothers, another one.
People with HIV, HCV, people engaging in sex work. I don't know what home training atmosphere means. Let's see if you want to expand on that.
Well, some people who work from home, I know in one meeting we had another one of the persons in the meeting was complaining because, and this was right near the beginning of COVID, because some people were home on the Zoom meeting, yet she was in the office. So she felt that we were taking advantage of whatever, and yeah, you're not really working because you're home. So maybe that's what they meant.
Interesting. Never heard that being stigmatized before, but
yeah, well, not so much, but
anybody else have ideas about behaviors, groups of people who are stigmatized? Carl, yes, absolutely. Folks who are differently abled or disabled. Folks, yeah, low income folks, folks experiencing poverty, immigrants, absolutely. All right, so thinking about some of these groups of people, LGBTQ folks, folks with mental illness, folks experiencing homelessness, people who use drugs, folks with disabilities, folks living in poverty, immigrants, etc. Do y'all notice anything those groups all have in common? Folks who have been incarcerated. Is there a theme here at all? Wow, are we asleep today? What's going on, y'all? All of these folks are
Four.
marginalized. They're all marginalized, vulnerable individuals. We're going to need y'all to jump in. I'm just saying, get some coffee, wake up. So my working definition of stigma is something that harms vulnerable populations, right? Stigma is there to harm folks who do not fit like the norm. They're not the majority groups, they're the minority groups. They're folks who are vulnerable, right? So we want to remember this when we're talking about the purpose and impact of stigma, right? So here we go. Stigma as some of these ideas borrowed from the National Harm Reduction Coalition. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. They talk about stigma as having three main purposes. We're going to look at the impact of those purposes, right? So the first purpose of stigma is to note that people are different from us, right? That person over there, they're not like me. They're not like my friends. They're not like my family members. I don't behave that way. We don't have the same values and beliefs. And so I want to keep that person out, right? You're not a part of this club. I don't want you sitting at the same lunch table as me. You stay over there. You're different, right? The second purpose of stigma tells us that people are dangerous, right? We already talked about some stereotypes about people who use drugs, right? They're dangerous, they're criminals. We often think that about people experiencing mental illness as well, right? Those people are dangerous. I don't want to give them a job. I don't want to rent them an apartment. I don't want them in my community, right? We want to keep danger away from us. That's a natural human instinct, right? So people are different. We want to keep them out. They're dangerous. We want to keep them away. And then the third purpose of stigma is so that we can discriminate against folks. When we think they're different, when we think they're dangerous, we don't want them to have access to the same resources and benefits that we enjoy in society, right? Like they don't get that stuff. They're not upstanding citizens such as ourselves, right? And so stigma also serves to keep people down, right? What then happens for the person who's experiencing all of that stigma, right? Let's use the example of someone who's using opioids, right? So someone's behavior, their use of opioids is stigmatized, right? The world at large, the community at large, society thinks that's a bad choice that person is making, right? There must be something wrong with them. That behavior is stigmatized. And then we have stereotypes and labels for that person, right? That if we think if somebody is using opioids, we often think that person is a criminal. We'll hear the term junkie thrown around, right? We're going to label them as etc. Whatever labels get assigned to that person, right? I'm using very non-trauma informed language here to prove a point, not because it's the language we should be using in these discussions, right? But then we're going to have expectations for how that person is going to behave. If we believe that someone is a criminal because they use opioids, we're going to expect them to steal from us. We're going to expect them to lie to us or to manipulate us, right? And if we think someone's going to lie to us, steal from us, and manipulate us, well, we're probably not going to offer them a job, right? Or if I'm a landlord, I'm not going to want to rent an apartment to them, right? So there's limited opportunities for that individual based on the stigmatized behavior, right? Filtered through the stereotypes and labels for these expectations and roles, right? Limited opportunities. And then all of that gets internalized and reinforced by the individual engaging in the stigmatizing behavior, right? Not good for folks. So realistically, let's look at why are people engaging in risky behaviors to begin with, right? What are throw out some ideas in the chat, unmute, talk to me. Why do people use drugs?
Unpopular opinion, because it's fun.
They're physically addicted.
Yep. Why else?
To manage
Peer
trauma.
pressure.
Oh, sorry. What'd you say, Molly?
To manage trauma.
Great. Can be a way to cope, says Mike. It's fun. What else?
An escape.
An escape. Absolutely, Brenda. Good one.
Other people around them are doing it.
Yep. Social settings. What else?
They're prescribed them.
Yeah, often. Right. Y'all get what I'm getting at here, right? So people engage in risky behavior. People use drugs for all types of reasons. They use drugs to relax and unwind. They use drugs in social settings. People use drugs as part of family traditions or spiritual rituals because it's fun and pleasurable. Most folks start using drugs initially because it's fun and it feels good and it's enjoyable. I would argue that probably almost everybody, if not everybody in this training right now, has at one point in time used a drug because it was fun and because it was pleasurable, right? People use drugs to deal with emotional or physical pain, to disconnect, and to make difficult circumstances more tolerable and to cope. A little while ago, I mentioned that idea of like value neutrality, right? I know that everyone's looking at this list and saying, that's an okay reason to use drugs, but that one's not, right? Or that's a better reason. And that, you know, maybe you shouldn't use drugs for this particular reason, right? But again, people are going to come with different backgrounds, different orientations to substance use, different values here, right? So working towards this idea of like, that value is human assigned, humans are fallible, right? These are just different reasons why people might engage. It's not our job to decide which reasons are good reasons versus which reasons are bad reasons, right? Kicking it over to Ryan for a minute.
So I think as providers, one of the things that we, you know, what we often see as we're working with participants and we're thinking about safety, right? We're thinking about autonomy also, but I think it's easy to think about safety, is we see a high risk behavior. It's like very visible, it's in our face, maybe signs of drug use that we see, thinking about kind of the opioid crisis, and we're seeing people with holes in their arms, for example, coming to get care at the clinic and things like that. It's very visible. It's kind of in your face, and we're concerned because we want to help people, right? And so I want to suggest to you that, as is the image here, what we're seeing, the highly visible thing that we're seeing, especially related to drug use or other high-risk behaviors, is just the tip of a much larger iceberg. And I think some folks alluded to this already. You'll see where I'm going with this. I think if we can flip that high risk behavior label that we're putting on what we see, and sort of understand that as a survival tool, right? I heard people use the word escape. I heard people use kind of terms related, you know, coping with trauma, those types of things. And so kind of reframing this like very visible and sometimes scary, concerning behavior or thing that we see, and sort of understand that as a survival tool, then we start to understand that there's a lot below the surface there, right? There's a lot to get at as a provider, as somebody who's interested in caring for somebody and helping somebody achieve, you know, housing stability, for example, right? And so we have to ask that next question as providers, right? What might they be trying to survive, right? And so you can see that we're already way past, we're in a way different sort of conversation zone than how do I stop you from doing this high risk behavior? It's what are you trying to survive? Like what's going on, right? And so we have there's a lot more digging that we may have to do in order to get to these questions of what might somebody be trying to survive. It requires a whole other level of trust building, right? Like if somebody is going to be willing to share with us that the thing that I'm doing is actually coping with some trauma, some difficulty, something I'm trying to survive, it requires a great deal of trust with your provider to be willing to have that conversation, right? And so we're already in a whole different mindset about where this conversation is actually going. No, I'm not trying to sort of put guardrails up around your behavior. I'm trying to understand what's going on with you at a more deep level, at a more human level, right? And so to kind of put a point on this, want to talk quickly about this relationship between risk and trauma. And I want to kind of offer a very quick and dirty definition of trauma, just to kind of cover our bases here. So one way of defining trauma is that it is an event in which a person feels terrified and helpless, right? So somebody experiences a loss of safety and a loss of control. And I love juxtaposing that definition with the two main goals of harm reduction, right? Increased safety and bodily autonomy. And so you can start to see where we're headed here with harm reduction as an antidote to some of these problems that people face. And there's a well-documented relationship between, in like the research literature, for example, between when people experience traumatic events, they often subsequently engage in risky behavior, right? As a way of coping, as a way of dealing. That risky behavior often shows up as drug use, right? And so it makes a lot of sense that when people have experienced trauma, and many of the people that we serve here at Pathways who have been street homeless for 10, 15 more years, What have they experienced while they were out there? What did it take to survive while they were out there in the elements, being stigmatized, having people walk past them, doing and saying things, having other people who are street homeless also trying to survive, you know, folks who rob each other, for example, or take belongings. I think it's, well, I'll stop short. I just want to say that there's a great deal of trauma that comes along with the street homelessness that people have experienced. And so it makes some sense that people are then coping with that trauma using high-risk behaviors, using drugs. Makes a lot of sense, obviously. And so when we can sort of understand and make that reframe from high-risk behavior that's very visible to us to, oh, survival tool that's helping somebody cope, it allows for a way different approach, right? It allows us to be more compassionate, to work more patiently, and to have just a broader understanding about what's actually happening in front of us, right? These quote unquote symptoms that we see, these behaviors that we see come from a place. People are communicating with us through these behaviors. And so we can sort of understand with more depth what's happening there. And that when people experience trauma that goes unaddressed, the risk of subsequent mental health and substance use disorders increases even further, right? And so when we see this high-risk behavior, this tip of the iceberg, if our next question is not, or our next kind of direction is not, what are you trying to survive? What are you coping with? We're not dealing with that trauma. What we're actually doing is we're not contributing to mitigating some of these future risks of mental health and substance use disorders as we go through the treatment process, right? So that's the connection between risk and trauma. I think it's probably obvious to many of you if you've worked with participants, but I think it's worth describing that in detail. And I'll kick it to Andrew to talk more about this connection between shame and stress.
Yeah, so relatedly, you know, along with risk and trauma, shame and stress are going to be a big part of our conversations around harm reduction, right? I love this quote from Brene Brown, who's a therapist, a social worker, who says, shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of change, right? So our participants need to believe in their capacity for change, and we as the providers working with those folks for the therapeutic alliance, right? We need to believe that our participants are capable of change as well, right? So what I want to say about shame is it's already built into our culture. Our participants are receiving messages about shame in homeless shelters, on the streets, from former providers, from family members, and plenty of other venues, right? They don't need to receive any more of it from us. And when our participants have made a mistake, right, when they've done that thing that we were like, oh, maybe that's a bad idea, you probably shouldn't do that, maybe that could compromise your housing, maybe that could compromise, you know, your job, right? Heaping more shame on someone and wagging our fingers at them, telling them, I told you so, is not going to help, right? Our participants are already aware if they've done something that's going to jeopardize their housing, that's going to jeopardize their program participation, their employment, et cetera, right? So instead, our job, instead of shaming folks, is to just reaffirm our commitment to support, right? Harm reductionists, housing first providers, right? Low barrier housing providers, our job is to show up and walk alongside folks through all of those stressful events. And that's what we look at them as, just stressful events. It's not a termination of services. We don't just discharge somebody or refer them to a higher level of care or say they're not ready for treatment just because there's been a bump in the road, right? In any long-term relationship, think about your relationships with your family members, your friends, your spouse or significant other, right? Like there have been stressful events. We don't just cut people off and say, oh, it's not a good fit, right? And we shouldn't be doing that with our participants either, right? Eventually, the crisis is going to get resolved, and we're going to build a lot of rapport and a lot of trust along the way if we don't abandon people during that time of need, right? And instead, actually rallying more support around someone during those moments is actually what we should be doing, right? So we talked about that kind of like cycle of stigma, but I also want to focus on this cycle of shame that also is going on for folks, right? So if we're engaging in a behavior that's stigmatized, we're going to be sent messages about that shame, right? Or messages of stigma that are reinforcing shame, right? So I'm using opioids and folks are sending me these messages about how I'm a bad person, right? I need to pull myself up by my bootstraps and like get clean and sober and go get a job and be a productive member of society. And if I don't do that, then I need to be ashamed of myself. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't like feeling shame. Feeling shame is very, very uncomfortable, right? Not something I enjoy, right? And so when people feel ashamed, they're often looking for a way to get rid of that feeling, right? They need a release. People don't want to sit and stew in the feeling of shame all the time. And oftentimes the way that we seek release is by re-engaging in the behavior that's being shamed in the first place. So if we're using substances and we feel ashamed about that, it's not often that we're gonna be like, you know what, I feel so ashamed. I gotta stop doing that. I gotta stop using this coping skill that's been serving me for so long, right? And so then we do something else risky, and our behavior is criticized for that, and we feel ashamed all over again. I think Ryan started to allude to this idea. I heard this at the National Harm Reduction Coalition conference a couple months ago. You know, if every time I see Ryan tells me, Andrew, you know, smoking's bad for you. Ryan keeps seeing me outside smoking cigarettes. I don't smoke cigarettes anymore. I used to. But if Ryan sees me outside smoking cigarettes and is like, Andrew, you know, smoking's really bad for you. I'm not going to avoid cigarettes. I'm going to start avoiding Ryan, right? And so thinking about just heaping shame on someone isn't going to actually change their behavior. And in fact, sometimes reinforces the need to engage in that risky behavior, right? For needing a release. So we mentioned the two main goals of harm reduction being safety and bodily autonomy. And I bring this into the discussion because I want to note that if we're only focusing on safety, we're unlikely to decrease messages of shame and stigma, right? So if Ryan is like telling me not to smoke cigarettes because it's unsafe, it's unhealthy for me, I'm still going to feel ashamed or stigmatized every time I'm told, you know, smoking's really bad for you. You should stop doing that. Or like, think about when you were a little kid and you were like running to go see your friends at the public pool and the lifeguard's like, hey, stop running by the pool, right? That lifeguard was concerned about your safety, but like, you know, when somebody tells you you're doing something wrong, you're like, you know, you feel it, right? It's uncomfortable. We don't like to be told we're doing something wrong. So we don't want to exclusively focus on safety because that decreases connection, right? And instead, if we can focus on reducing shame and reducing stigma, what we're actually doing is inherently increasing safety and connection, right? If you know that you can have open and honest conversations with me about your substance use, right? We're going to have connection, right? You're going to feel comfortable coming to me, talking to me about the challenges you're going through. And then I can provide resources or help point you towards information that maybe will keep you safer, right? So we don't want to only, safety is important, but the way we get to safety is by reducing shame and stigma and increasing connection with folks. Any questions about this? Comments? All right, chat's open if you need it. So moving into this conversation about like harm reduction, where does it come from? I want to say harm reduction is not a new idea, right? Just like Housing First, it's been around since the 80s. It's been in SAMHSA's National Registry of Evidence-Based Practices since 2007. Harm reduction also is like not this newfangled radical idea, right? The Black Panther Party's free breakfast for children program in the health clinics from the 1960s and 70s, that's harm reduction, right? The Young Lords acupuncture program for heroin users in the South Bronx around the same time, also harm reduction. The reproductive rights and women's health movements rooted in 1970s activism and grassroots activism in response to the 1980s AIDS crisis, right? Harm reduction has always been for marginalized, stigmatized communities by marginalized, stigmatized communities, right? When folks are not getting, when communities are not getting their needs met, when they're not being taken care of, they find ways to take care of each other and meet those needs, right? Harm reduction comes from drug users, it comes from sex workers, it comes from people of color. It does not come from social workers, and it does not come from professionals. I do want to really emphasize that point early on. Going to ask y'all to do some reflection with us right now. So unmiking, using the chat. If you're feeling brave, it's very interesting how we have different groups of people respond to this question. Tell us about some risky activities that are a part of your life. What risky behaviors do you regularly or daily or sometimes engage in?
Nicotine.
Great.
To
Thank you.
vape, but I dropped the cigarettes, but I still got the vape. So yeah.
Right. Thank you, Wendy. What else?
Speeding.
Eating?
Speeding.
Speeding. Yes.
Oh.
That is a popular answer. We get a lot of speed demons in our harm reduction trainings. What else? I see you unmuted, Brenda. You got something for us?
Talking on the phone while you're driving and speeding.
All right, compounding our risk behaviors. Great. What else?
Terrible.
What other risky activities are part of our lives?
Drinking.
Drinking. Great. What else? Nobody else has any risk. Ryan rode their bike to work today. I'll tell you what, riding your bike in Philadelphia, one of my favorite things to do, but incredibly risky, right? If you drove into the office today, risky. If you took public transportation, especially in Philadelphia, I don't know about Boston, risky, right? Risky activities are a part of our daily lives. Other common answers we'll hear is getting on Amazon, spending a bunch of money at midnight, right? Looking at memes till 2 o'clock in the morning, not getting enough sleep, right? Oh, Nikisha's in the chat with the scratch off tickets. Listen, I know that Mega Millions is like over $1 billion now. I'm quite tempted. All right. So we've acknowledged that we got some risky activities going on in our lives. For our folks who are brave enough to share with us, I'd like to invite you back to answer some of these other questions. How do you reduce harm related to some of these activities? So thinking about speeding, thinking about drinking, thinking about nicotine, what are ways that you reduce harm related to those activities?
I went to the lowest level of nicotine.
Okay, so you increased how much nicotine you were intaking. Great.
Decreased, yes.
Yeah, yes, decrease. That's what I meant. Thank you. Good example. What else?
Not drinking and driving. Getting a license.
Yep, getting a designated driver, taking a lift, making sure you're not driving. What else?
To avoid speeding to work, because that's what I do, go to bed earlier so you can get up earlier.
Great. So managing your time differently so that speeding isn't a necessity. Good. Anything else?
I really liked, not to speak to someone else's, but I share this, Lily put in the chat working as like the high risk activity. And I think for a lot of us, that's very accurate, depending on the position that you're in. And I think there's a lot of ways that like maybe your agency has institutional policies in place to try and reduce harm. Maybe you do things like your calendar always says where you are, you only go to certain visits with a colleague or something like that. But I really like that example of something that like probably most people in this meeting could agree that whatever you do for work might, especially if it's like a consumer facing role, probably has some risks associated with it.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that into the discussion, Jamie. I really appreciate that. All right, so I want to take it a step further. We've identified the risk behavior. We identified some ways that we reduce harm related to those activities. Now talk to me about how do you weigh these risks? How do you decide what to act on, what not to act on, when to act on it, when not to act on it? Do you, what are the considerations? How do you weigh those decisions?
I didn't see who just spoke about work being high risk, but that was a very good one. I think well, I don't know, I don't want to speak for everybody else, but we do it so often it becomes a regular part. You know, I get a call, oh, someone is up on the 3rd floor, shit hammered, drunk, and it's not a staffed house, and you run over there to see what's going on, and you run upstairs, not really even thinking that this could, I mean, you kind of think, but you do it anyways. And how do you weigh those decisions? I don't know. For me, it's, I get a call. Who else is going to do it? You just got to do it. Not even much of a decision. Just go.
Mine was, I was the one who said working, and I will definitely own that. I think I meant it in 2 ways, like working too much and having poor work boundaries, which is a slippery slope. And then I think we're all working in really risky environments. And sometimes like my brain just snaps on and all of a sudden I'm like, oh shit, like I need to really check in with where I am and like call for backup or something. So weighing those risks, like yesterday I worked 12 hours because like we just have a lot going on. And so I'm trying to parse out other things in my life and say like, okay, I can let that go so I can spend more time on this. Like, am I taking my lunch break? Like, is this worth it to stay longer? Like, what's the payoff? So I'm like constantly having like a checklist in my brain of, am I overstretching myself? Is this responsible? Is this going to like benefit the people that I'm serving? Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so we're like factoring in other information available to us into making these decisions, right? Carl in the chat said, I'm gonna think about the severity of past consequences. Sometimes those past consequences are gonna influence my future behavior, right? Using the example of speeding, stuff I've heard other folks say before is like, is it raining? Is it nighttime? Is there a ton of traffic? Am I in a populated area or a rural area, right? Like, I just got back from a road trip down to Texas, and you know what the speed limit is on a Texas highway? 75 miles per hour, right? I don't like driving that fast. To me, that feels like speeding, right? But down there, if I were driving 55 miles per hour, that would actually be more unsafe, right? And so there are going to be different factors from day to day that influence how we make these decisions about risk, right? And I also want to note that there are going to be judgments associated with these choices sometimes, right? I know that a risky thing that I do that I shouldn't do, and I'm going to like out myself and you're all going to judge me, is I will sometimes text while I'm driving, right? I know it's super unsafe and I really shouldn't do it. And sometimes I just do it anyway, right? But if I see somebody else texting and driving, I'm like, oh, can you believe that person? How dare they, right? And so I know that there are judgments associated with that choice that I sometimes choose to make, right? And a thing I want to say about this is the judgments associated with our choices often have to do with how we look and what marginalized identities we hold, right? Like earlier when we talked about stigma, one of the first stigmatized groups of people that came out in that discussion was folks who are overweight, right? So think about you're walking through the park and you see somebody on their lunch break and they're eating McDonald's for lunch, right? If that person you perceive as overweight or obese, right? You're the back of your mind might have a couple of thoughts about whether or not that person should be eating McDonald's for lunch, right? Meanwhile, if you see somebody who is a thin person, looks very fit, and they're eating McDonald's for lunch, you might not have that same thought, right? If you see somebody at the grocery store checking out and they're using an EBT card, they're using food stamps, right? And the conveyor is full of, chips and ice cream, right? You might have some thoughts about that versus somebody who's using EBT to buy a bunch of like fresh fruits and vegetables, right? So different parts of our identity inform the judgments that are going to be directed towards us when we're engaging in behaviors, right? And the more marginalized identities we hold at once, right? So if you're someone who's a racial minority and you're living in poverty, right? There's going to be more judgment and more stigma associated with some of your decisions, right? So I just want to acknowledge that. So y'all get it. There's risk everywhere, right? Playing a sport, riding your bike is risky, right? Any of my football fans in the room know that, like, you can put all that padding and the helmet on somebody on the field, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean they're protected from other injuries, right? You can have a designated driver to drive you home if you've been drinking, right? That doesn't mean another car's not going to hit you. COVID has been a very interesting time to talk about risk, right? Who are we wearing a mask around versus who we're not wearing a mask around? Are we going to travel or not, right? And we practice harm reduction in our relationships all the time, right? When you don't tell your boss off when they made you mad, right? You're practicing harm reduction, right? When you don't nitpick at your spouse about that, folding your shirts wrong again, right? You're practicing harm reduction. So this is all part of our daily lives. It's not something exclusive to our clients, to our participants, right? Some more examples, right? Getting sunshine is something we need as human beings. We need vitamin D. We need the sun, right? But too much sun, and I can tell you as a very fair-skinned person whose mother is a dermatologist, too much sun is very bad for you. If you've ever had sun poisoning, wow, that's a trip. So we got to use sunscreen, right? If we're going to be in the sun for a long time, a little sunscreen is a good idea. If we're going to be in a car, abiding by the speed limit, wearing a seatbelt, those are ways that we can reduce harm. Wearing a helmet, using contraceptives, using PrEP, using birth control, right? That's how we practice harm reduction. Smoking a filtered cigarette versus an unfiltered cigarette, using a vape, right? So we know, right, like these tools are just part of the ways that we can reduce harm. They're not going to prevent all potential consequences, right? So when we think about people using substances, harm reduction can mean equipping individuals with the supplies they need to make that substance use a little bit safer, right? We can't ensure that people aren't going to overdose. We can't ensure that their drugs won't be cut with dangerous additives, right? But we can provide things like sterile syringes or other supplies that are going to lessen the risk of infection or contracting a chronic illness like HIV or hepatitis C, right? So in order to do this, we need to be able to have honest and direct conversations with folks about what their goals are. Not everybody is going to be interested in achieving total abstinence or pursuing, recovery as we've traditionally defined it. So as harm reductionists, we want to help folks identify safer means of consumption, perhaps sometimes, right? Like snorting versus injecting, substituting a drug with fewer adverse effects. We'll talk a lot more about this in subsequent sessions, right? But harm reduction is really about honoring an individual's self-determination and empowering them to make choices that they feel are best for themselves, right? Remembering our participants are experts on themselves. And then we want to celebrate any smaller incremental change that moves somebody's, health and safety in a more, positive direction. So we talked about all of the ways that we ourselves are using harm reduction in our lives, right? And what I want to say is that, like, risky behaviors are they're part of our lives, right? It's part of being human. We can't live in the world without engaging in some type of risk. And beyond that, taking risks can also help us to survive and to thrive as human beings, right? The job that you work at now, it's probably not your first job you've ever had, right? You had a different job before, and then you said, oh, look at this new opportunity. I think I want to go for that, right? You took a risk. You didn't know if you were going to like your new job. You didn't know if your boss was going to be a jerk. You didn't know if you were going to like your coworkers, right? The first time you ask somebody out on a date or tell somebody you have a crush on them, that's taking a risk, right? They might shoot you down and tell you that they think that you are stinky, right? They don't want to go out with you. And then you get your hopes dashed, right? that's taking a risk. Risk is part of being human, and it's something that we have to do to live life to the fullest and live our best lives, right? And so with our participants, harm reduction is about centering their choice, their autonomy, their self-determination. Just like you or I, you know, we need the dignity of making risky decisions, taking risks, making choices. If we weren't afforded that, right, it's going to impede our personal growth and impact our quality of life. And there's no reason why we should treat our clients any differently. They should be entitled to making those choices as well.
So some quick kind of dispelling of myths and just hitting you with like what harm reduction is and isn't, what it does and doesn't do. Again, there is quite a bit of misinformation out there in kind of the general public about harm reduction, but we got people who, like 60% of you are saying like, I'm a harm reductionist, so this shouldn't be a surprise. But what harm reduction does is it recognizes that people make their own choices based on their options and opinions of what feels right for them, right? It's you're living your life, you're an expert on your life, and you're sort of confronted with situations every single day that you're saying like, what choices do I have? Okay, I'm going to make the right choice for me in this moment. And so harm reduction recognizes that and allows for the dignity to say, hey, that's a valid choice, like based on the options that you have available. And my own background and my own values shouldn't influence that. Harm reduction does acknowledge risky behaviors, but it does so in a non-judgmental way, right? We're not pretending like the thing that you're doing is not risky. Andrew's like, Ryan, you're riding your bike to work. And when you leave work at night and it's dark and you're wearing a black jacket, like that is risky, right? But it's non-judgmental and it's in a kind of a problem-solving oriented framework. It's like any way that you could reduce risk. He gave me a light one time for my bike. That was helpful. And I don't mean to make light of risky behaviors because I just want to sort of say that like risky behaviors are part of the conversation, right? We're not pretending like they don't exist in harm reduction, right? And it is about identifying practical ways of lessening the consequences of whatever behavior somebody's engaged in, right? So we're in problem-solving creativity mode around, yes, we agree that there's risk here because we're acknowledging it. That's what harm reduction does. And we're saying like, what might you actually do? Well, Ryan might be willing to put a light on his bike, but not be willing to stop riding at night, right? And so that's practical because I'll actually take advantage of it, right? And as we started to allude to earlier, here in a kind of a housing context, we apply harm reduction broadly to substance use, to mental health, whether somebody chooses or doesn't choose to be in mental health treatment, take mental health meds, see a therapist or whatever, and other behavioral health concerns. And so broadly, the goal of harm reduction in a housing first context can be seen as keeping somebody from arriving back on the street, right? From being homeless again. And so that encompasses such a wide range of behaviors. We'll talk more about some of those examples. Go ahead, Andrew, I see you unmuting.
Yeah, I just want to, note that housing itself is harm reduction, right? Like getting somebody inside, they're going to inherently be safer than they would be sleeping on the streets, right? So I know we're doing a lot of kind of setting the stage for subsequent weeks and things we're talking about. And we do want you to be like bringing in your ideas and your questions about how this applies to folks in housing, right? So we're doing a lot of kind of like philosophical readying for our subsequent weeks, but that the housing piece, that's the context in which we're talking about all of this. Just want to make that very clear.
Yep. Want to skip ahead. We'll talk more about, we have a bunch of content here that's going to take us over time. So we'll put that into some other weeks. So let me skip ahead a little bit. Actually, here, let me cover the harm reduction doesn't. So we did harm reduction does. Let's do harm reduction doesn't. Again, some myths that we see out there around harm reduction is like, there's no rules, anything goes. And that's not true for harm reduction, right? It doesn't mean folks are never going to experience any consequences for their actions. We're not even powerful enough to allow for that, right? And so we also have to remember, especially in a housing context where we're providing the housing often, that choice doesn't mean ultimate choice. Right? Doesn't mean absolute choice. in that sometimes if we see the kind of repeated behaviors that is threatening somebody's housing, the choices sometimes can narrow, right? And so we always offer choice, but while you had a really wide range of choices, 3 times of the same thing, or 4 times or 10 times that you've done this thing that's going to threaten your tenancy and it's going to end you up back on the street, may require us to sort of like start to limit those choices to help keep you housed, for example. Harm reduction also doesn't endorse or encourage drug use or other high-risk behaviors. We're not saying like, hey, like 60% of people in this room think crack cocaine is good for everybody. Why don't we actually start like disseminating it ourselves? Like everybody should be on crack. Like it's just not like part of the conversation, right? And in fact, things like syringe exchanges, the research literature shows that those things don't increase drug use for people, right? It just allows for a safer opportunity for people who are already using drugs. People are not seeing a needle exchange and saying, I never before thought about injecting drugs. I think I'll try now because this is here, right? That's not how it works. And harm reduction just broadly doesn't encourage high-risk behaviors. It sort of meets people where they're at with their already occurring behaviors. And it doesn't exclude or dismiss abstinence-based options, right, as viable options for people. There are people that really would prefer and do better with pursuing an abstinence-based recovery model. And if that's their choice, we're respecting their autonomy there too, right? And so we make those options available here in-house as well. Somebody wants to get connected with inpatient drug treatment facility, great, let's do it. I'll go with you. I'll take you to the unit intake appointment. And so it is a part of the process, abstinence-based recovery. It's simply not the only option available to people. And we're not attempting to minimize or ignore the fact that there are harms associated with some of these high-risk behaviors, including illicit drug use or sexual activity or other risky behaviors. We're not pretending like those things don't exist. All right, so let me jump ahead a little bit. Go ahead, Andrew, I see you unmuted.
We'll save this one too, because I want to leave some time for some questions. We'll incorporate these into subsequent weeks.
Perfect, okay. So let's leave you with a bit of a review, a recap of what we covered so far. And again, yeah, offer an opportunity to like, just engage with these ideas, talk, ask questions. So we really like this quote from Dylan Stanley, who's from Harm Reduction, Ohio. Dylan says, harm reduction is no place for ego. It's a place to forget what you think you know and set aside your opinion so that when you meet people where they're at, you can take the time to ask them where they want to go, right? Thinking more about that value neutrality that Andrew mentioned before, right? And so we don't get to decide how other people should live their lives. They're the expert of their lives. And telling people what to do or like how to live, how to be healthy and safe, can tend to push people away, right? If they're not ready to hear those kinds of things, those suggestions. Rather, openness and acceptance of the individual as they are without judgment invites them to engage further with us, right? And we can continue to actually help them more by identifying ways to be safer, to be healthier in collaboration, right? And so we're setting aside, we're taking off our hat of, I'm the treatment expert, I know what you need to do, and giving back people their autonomy and sort of partnering with them and supporting them through their process.
So some key takeaways from today, and again, this is just kind of our first step. We're going to have a lot more time to talk about these ideas, but key takeaways from today that I want to make sure we're bringing into our discussion in subsequent weeks. First and foremost is remembering that our participants are the experts on their own lives and experiences. Just because we have a 2, 4, 6-year degree, whatever we have, right, a couple of letters behind our names, doesn't mean that we get to make decisions about what's best for other people, right? We can share some knowledge that we have, some information that we have to help folks make decisions about what might be best for them. But it's not our job to dictate how other people should be living their lives. I think we also need to remember, right, that behavior serves a function. When we looked at that iceberg image, right, and it's like looking at this survival tool, thinking about what might somebody be trying to survive, behavior is meeting a need, right? And so maybe we can look at are there other ways to help someone meet this need, right? Or can we help someone be safer while meeting this need? But behavior serves a function, and we need to get curious about what that is, right? And figure out how we can talk to folks about that. I want to remind us that stigma and shame really only serve to harm vulnerable people, right? And we need to look at that. We need to try to remove those messages, any messages or undertones of stigma and shame in our conversations about risk with folks if we want to do our work well and effectively. And part of that is just remembering, like, we're all using harm reduction in our daily lives already, right? This is not just something that's for those people, right? Like those people who are doing those dangerous or those undesirable things, right? Everybody's using harm reduction, right? And so certainly we're assigning value to those behaviors all the time, just like other people are assigning values to our behaviors, right? But remembering that harm reduction is just part of being a human, and risk is just part of the human experience is a really important piece of this work. Again, we have some folks in the room who are like, I'm a harm reductionist, right? And other folks who are like, I'm newer to this, I'm still figuring it out. What I want to say is nobody is the end all be all expert on harm reduction. I'm not an expert on harm reduction. Ryan's not an expert on harm reduction. Nobody in this room is like the best harm reductionist, right? Harm reduction is a practice. We get better at it the more we do it, but we also need a team of people to do it alongside, right? We need to have these conversations with other people, and that's part of the reason we're doing this learning community. That's part of the reason we're bringing in different folks from different agencies and saying, hey, turn your cameras on, talk to us, let's build community together, because we get better at this work by hearing different perspectives and thinking differently, right? But as we practice harm reduction, we need to bring all of our creativity, all of our patience, and again, all of our empathy to the table, right? Remembering that folks have gone through a lot, and we're just trying to help the best we can, right? We need the creativity, the patience, and the empathy to do that well. Again, those two main goals, we're going to talk about this a lot: safety and bodily autonomy, right? We want to increase people's sense of safety and allow them to make decisions about what they do or don't do with their bodies. But again, if you remember that kind of like cycle of shame, we don't want to only focus on safety, right? Instead, we want to focus on connection with folks, and that will inherently help folks be safer and reduce those messages of stigma and shame. A lot of this is going to feel uncomfortable. If these conversations are newer to you, if you're talking about behaviors or experiences that you have yourself never experienced, sometimes that is, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to talk about this, right? It can feel really uncomfortable. And part of the work is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Learning how to kind of sit in that uncertain gray area. There's not always going to be an easy answer. There's not always going to be a right answer. Sometimes we're going to try something and it's not going to work out, right? And that's okay. We're going to go back to the drawing board and come up with something else, right? But some of this is just easing into the unknown sometimes, right? And relaxing with the idea of like not having all of the answers. And then lastly, sometimes we just need to look at what it means to redefine success, right? We're not going to get every single participant that we work with completely off of drugs and substances, and they're never going to use again. They're never going to have any problems, right? We need to ask our participants about what their goals are, right? What is it that they want to work on? And when we can kind of expand our ideas around what success is, then we get to celebrate a lot more often, right? If we were only celebrating every time somebody like got clean and stayed clean forever, our work would be pretty bleak, right? So looking at like what success means for each person and then celebrating any small step we're taking in that direction. That's what we're working on and what we're hoping for. So I know a bunch of folks are already jetting off to other meetings. I do want to like offer a couple of minutes here for thoughts, reflections. What are you hearing? Anything new to you today? Anything exciting? Anything you have questions about? So while you're thinking about those, if you, oh, somebody unmuted, I heard it. Come on,
Don't.
Jamie, what you got for me?
I was just gonna ask if this like cohort is, I know this is like a premature question, if this is happening again in coming months, because I'm already seeing so much content that I'm like, this is so helpful, and I can think of so many other people who couldn't do it this time around that would really benefit from this and might be really interested.
So we have another cohort that's running on Thursdays in the afternoons. I'm not sure if there's still space available in that cohort off the top of my head, but originally we had talked about running 3 concurrent cohorts. So I'm certain there's the possibility that we could do this again at a later date. So if you don't mind including that on the evaluation, because we're going to pass those all along to RIZE, and that might be helpful feedback for them that, you know, we might want to do this again. Speaking of the evaluation, Ryan dropped the link for that in the chat. Click on over there. Tell us how we did today. Tell us, you know, what questions you have, what we need to tweak moving forward. We really do look at every single one of those and take that feedback very seriously. So if you're like, hey, this part of the training was great, but this part could use some work, let us know and we'll make those adjustments. And then we're going to follow up with an email later today. Everyone will get that link to the evaluation in the email. I'll say that evaluation's open for 2 days. We really want you to fill that out within 48 hours so this information is kind of fresh in your head. So please do that before the evaluation closes, and we'll get you at the end of the series certificates, CE credit if you qualify for that as well. That email with the link will also include a copy of today's slides. We'll have some tip sheets for you intermittently throughout the training series. But yeah, other than that, we will look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday. And we'll meet from 10:30 to 11:30. It'll be an hour-long session as opposed to 2 hours. So each Tuesday, 10:30 to 11:30 for the next 5 weeks. And we'll continue kind of talking about this material. Any other last minute questions, comments? Awesome. Well, thank you everybody who came today. We're looking forward to seeing you again and talking a lot more soon. And hope you have a good rest of your week. Take care.
Bye. Oh, have a good week.